The need for a Savior starts with a simple admission. We're not perfect. You're not, and I'm not. Are we beautiful? Of course. Are we beloved? Always. Do we have capacity for goodness? Every single day. But perfection is a standard that we can't meet. Neither does the world, neither does life. Now, it wasn't always that way. If you read Genesis, back in the Garden of Eden, we were meant to live a life that was perfect. In a world where there was no pain, no fear, no hurt, where resources were abundant for everyone. But when Adam and Eve bit the fruit, all of that broke. And it wasn't just the thorns in the ground or the power imbalances. The way that we see the world and each other and relate to it changed and bent. There was jealousy, there was competition, there was blame, there was the tendency to see each other as opponents as well as family, and to say, I must get for myself because if I don't have, then the universe will not be fulfilled, and who cares if it costs you? And that's the way that we have grown sense, to the point where even if perfection existed, we wouldn't be able to see it or relate to it, let alone live it out. Here's the thing, nothing imperfect can last forever. Think of all the broken things in the world: racism and bigotry, gender discrimination and abuse, wars and natural disasters, power imbalances and illnesses, food insecurity and poverty. We cope with these things every day, but what if they never ended? Stick the word forever on the end of any of them, and the world becomes a cruel and ultimately futile and hopeless place. These things must end. My mom was a wonderful woman. She was born right after the Great Depression. She survived poverty, abuse, 2 divorces. She did whatever she could to raise her children well, children she loved wonderfully and desperately. As with every parent-child relationship, there were beautiful things about our interactions, also things that were broken. And I remember when I was a young adult, looking at her and thinking, is this ever going to be made truly right? Will there ever be a moment where she gets to be who she is and I get to be who I am, and we are completely together and there is nothing in between us, just the love we're trying to show to each other, but we're not quite able to bridge that gap? And I remember realizing that probably that wasn't going to happen. And I think this is true of all our relationships. Everybody's had that moment where they realize that no matter what they do, they can't make things the way they want them to be. But does that mean they can never be that way? Will there never be a moment where my mother and I just look at each other and are able to love each other? That would be sad. But that is what God promises us, that moment will come. That's what death ends up being for us. A boundary on our power to hurt each other or to hurt the world. Also a boundary on the world's power to hurt us. We do affect each other in very important and significant ways, but that power is not ultimate. There is something more at work that is beyond us. And it's important to acknowledge that nothing we do gets us around this situation. No construct that we come up with, be it better morals or governmental structures or even the perfect faith community, those just end up being other ways to exercise our own power. We may need them, they may be good for our context and situation, but ultimately they are not the final answer. Faith cannot be contained solely in or by them. But even when Adam and Eve broke the world long, long ago, God didn't abandon them. He loved them. And He continued to stay with them even when He had to compromise with a world that wasn't perfect. Given the choice between perfection and us, God chose to love us. And that's true for each of us down to this day, and it will always be so. Life isn't supposed to be a compromise between love and pain, though. So God did one more thing. God sent His own self in the form of His Son, Jesus Christ, to us to fill up our places of emptiness and brokenness with grace and love. And Jesus did this not by meeting us in our places of power, but by meeting us precisely where we were most empty and broken. The Old Testament describes death as being insubstantial and powerless. The New Testament describes it as being separated from God and each other. God would not let that stand. Instead, God walked into death to redeem it and us, so that love would not end. But we end. Still, God would not be separated from us. When Jesus Christ went to the cross, He went into death. And when He went into death, God went to the one place that He had never gone. Except this wasn't like every other death. When death swallows someone like you or me, it's just fulfilling its cosmic role, making sure brokenness turns insubstantial, putting an end to imperfection. But death couldn't swallow a perfect God. Instead, when death chomped down on Jesus, Jesus became like the great cosmic jawbreaker, breaking the power of death, reuniting God with all the people who had gone into it, and transforming death itself into the passageway to a new life together with God and everyone whom God cherishes. Life without fear, pain, or separation anymore, a life full of eternal love and joy. Now, we could spend a lifetime talking about the ramifications of this, how it changed us and changed the whole world. For now, let's just say that God's love is greater than anything. God refused to be separated from us no matter what. When we were stuck in brokenness and imperfection, God filled up that brokenness with grace and love and reunited us with wholeness again. Our life of faith together isn't about setting up some kind of moral code that separates out good from bad. It isn't about erecting a church as high as we can and pretending like that saves us either. These things and hundreds of more like them are just ways to skirt around our own imperfections and ultimately our own deaths. We're not going to do that. Instead, we confess that this doesn't center around us because it can't. We come together around the God who cherishes us, and we follow that God by cherishing each other and the world. We're not saved by our own moral uprightness or great decision-making. We're saved in spite of those things, because we were, are, and always will be loved.